In a small, sun-soaked coastal village in Africa, Tembe Bay thrives on the sea. The people here depend on the ocean for their survival. Its tides and fish are their way of life. At the heart of this village lives a young girl named Zamda. She is the daughter of Olembe, the most respected and skilled diver in the region. Known for his deep knowledge of the sea, Olembe is a living legend in Tembe Bay. He has spent his life learning its secrets, and now he is passing this ancient wisdom down to his daughter. Zamda, curious and observant, has always felt an unusual connection to the ocean. As a child, she would watch her father dive into the deep waters, his movements graceful and confident, as if he were part of the ocean itself. From a young age, Olembe taught her to listen to the ocean, to read the way the waves roll and the winds blow. He taught her how to sense the currents and how the fish move with the tides. This knowledge isn't something that can be found in books. It's an instinct passed down through generations of fishermen and divers. Zamda's bond with the sea is deep. She feels its power, understands its moods, and has learned to trust its rhythms. Her connection to the ocean is unlike anyone else in the village, and she knows, deep down, that the sea is more than just a source of food and work. It is a part of who she is. One fateful day, as the sun beat down on the shimmering waters of Tembe Bay, tragedy struck the small coastal village, changing everything forever. Olembe, the respected diver, set out for a deep-sea dive as he had done countless times before, but this time things went horribly wrong. His boat, a sturdy vessel that had carried him through many expeditions, exploded in an instant, sending a shockwave of panic throughout the village. The once peaceful waters, which had always been a source of life and sustenance, now became the site of unimaginable devastation. The cause of the explosion was a mystery. Some whispered about strange currents, while others blamed the ever-encroaching pollution that was slowly poisoning the waters. No one knew for sure. What was certain was that Olembe, the man who had spent his life understanding the sea, was gone. He had been the heart of Tembe Bay, not only a skilled diver, but a guiding figure for his daughter Zamda, whose connection to the ocean was as deep as his own. The news of his death hit the village like a storm, leaving everyone in a state of shock and disbelief. The entire village mourned the loss of Olembe. His death wasn't just a personal tragedy for Zamda and her family. It was a loss for the entire community, which had looked to him for guidance and wisdom. People gathered in the village square, their faces solemn, as they paid their respects to the man who had taught so many how to survive in the unpredictable sea. It was as if the very soul of the village had been torn away, leaving a deep and painful void. In the midst of the mourning, Olembe's second wife, Zula, stepped forward. Though she had always been a quiet figure in the background, Zula quickly took control of the household. She had always been more reserved, her presence more dominant than nurturing, and now, with Olembe gone, she assumed a position of power. Her new role, however, would soon come with a cruelty that no one had seen coming. Zula's heart seemed to harden overnight. Instead of offering Zamda the comfort and support she so desperately needed, Zula began to treat her with disdain. She blamed Zamda for Olembe's death, calling her cursed, a bad omen. It was as though Zula had found a way to channel her grief and anger, directing it toward the only one left to bear the weight of her accusations. Zamda, what was once a warm, loving home, became a place of tension and fear. Zamda's world was turned upside down. Where once she had been a beloved daughter, cherished by her father and supported by the village, she now found herself isolated. Zula, in her new role as head of the household, took away Zamda's room, forcing her to sleep in the cold, damp fish shed, a far cry from the comfortable space she had known before. Each day, Zamda felt more and more like an outsider in her own home. The love and respect she had once known from her father were replaced by coldness and cruelty. At mealtimes, Zamda was forced to eat leftovers, scraps thrown to the dogs. Zula, with a cold, almost bitter gaze, watched as her daughter-in-law's cruelty took hold, making Zamda feel worthless, invisible. The other villagers too turned their backs on her. The sympathy that had once surrounded the young girl slowly turned into judgment, as if she had somehow brought disaster upon her family. Even Zamda's stepsister Sifa took advantage of the situation, mocking her openly. Sifa lived in comfort, in the warmth of the main house, while Zamda worked tirelessly alongside the cleaning women, scrubbing floors and washing dishes. It felt as if everyone in the village, once her support system, had abandoned her in her time of need. Zamda, once full of hope and dreams of following in her father's footsteps, now felt lost and broken, her spirit crushed beneath the weight of Zula's cruelty. In the face of such cruelty, Zamda found herself facing a cruel truth. Her world had been torn apart and there was no turning back. The sea, once a place of solace and understanding, now seemed distant and unreachable. Her father's teachings no longer felt like a comfort, but a painful reminder of the life she had lost. Yet deep inside, Zamda knew that the ocean still called to her. She could feel its presence, its power, urging her to rise above the pain and find a way to navigate the storm of her life, just as her father had once taught her to read the currents of the sea. After the tragic explosion that took her father's life, Zamda's world was never the same. The village mourned Olembe, but no one seemed to mourn for her. Instead, she was left alone to face a cruel new reality, one that was made even worse by her stepmother, Zula. With Olembe gone, Zula wasted no time in taking control of the household. But it wasn't just her authority that shifted, it was the way she began to treat Zamda. Zula's grief turned into a dark anger, and she found someone to blame: Zamda. The young girl, who had once been her father's pride and joy, was now the target of Zula's wrath. Zula called her cursed, accusing her of bringing bad luck that led to Olembe's death. To Zula, it didn't matter that Zamda had nothing to do with the explosion. In her eyes, Zamda was the source of all their misfortune. It was as though, with her father's death, Zula's heart had hardened, and she needed someone to take the blame for the pain she was feeling. That someone was her stepdaughter. In the days that followed, Zamda's life took a harsh turn. Zula stripped her of the room she once called her own, a space filled with memories of her father. Instead, Zamda was forced to sleep in the fish shed, a cold and smelly place where the scent of fish clung to everything. The comfort and warmth of her childhood home were gone. The room she had once shared with her father, where she had learned to love the ocean, now felt like a distant memory. The fish shed, dark and lonely, became her new reality. She slept on the hard, cold ground, her only company the whispers of the wind outside and the faint sounds of the village carrying through the wall. At meal times, things only got worse. Where once Zamda had eaten with her father and shared in the village's food, she now found herself eating scraps, leftovers that had been tossed aside, as if she was no better than the dogs. Zula, with a cold look on her face, barely acknowledged her. She would sit at the table, eating her own meals in comfort, while Zamda ate the remnants of the food meant for others. There was no love, no care, only cruelty. Every meal became a reminder of her new, humiliating place in the household. What once was a family of warmth and respect had become a house of bitterness and disdain. Her stepsister, Sifa, seemed to take delight in Zamda's misery. While Zamda worked alongside the cleaning women, scrubbing the floors and washing the dishes, Sifa lived in luxury, untouched by the hardships that now defined Zamda's life. Sifa's mocking words were constant, her laughter a reminder of everything Zamda had lost. While Zamda was left to do the menial tasks, Sifa sat back in the comfort of the main house, enjoying the luxury that now belonged only to her. Sifa's cruelty was sharp and unrelenting, and each day, Zamda found herself sinking further into despair. The worst part wasn't just the physical abuse, it was the emotional toll it took. Zamda had once been a proud daughter of Olembe, admired and respected by the village. But now, in her stepmother's eyes, she was nothing more than a burden, a source of misfortune. The village too seemed to turn away from her. The sympathy they had once shown for the loss of Olembe was now replaced with cold indifference, as if Zamda herself were the cause of the family's pain. In the midst of all this cruelty, Zamda's spirit began to break. the once bright and hopeful girl who had dreamed of following in her father's footsteps, now felt trapped and abandoned. The sea, which had once been her refuge and her guide, now felt distant, almost unreachable. Every day was a battle, and the joy she once felt when diving into the ocean with her father was replaced by loneliness and sorrow. The home that had once been a place of warmth and laughter was now a prison of cruelty. Yet deep inside, something still stirred within Zamda. Even though Zula's cruelty crushed her, even though Sifa's mockery stung, Zamda knew that she wasn't truly defeated. The teachings her father had given her about the ocean, the strength, the resilience, the ability to read the tides, were still within her. The sea, her true home, called to her in ways words could never express. Despite the abuse, despite the pain, Zamda held on to that spark of hope, the belief that someday she would rise above this cruelty and find her way back to the life her father had taught her to live. For months, the once bountiful sea around Tembe Bay began to change. The ocean, which had always been generous, suddenly became unpredictable, its calm waters turning treacherous and strange. Fish, the lifeblood of the village, vanished without a trace. Where the villagers had once cast their nets with confidence, now there was nothing but empty waters. The boats, which would usually return with their holds full, came back empty, their crews tired and defeated. The situation grew more dire with each passing day. Families who had once depended on the sea for their daily bread began to face hunger. The village, which had always been filled with life, became quiet, with fewer and fewer people able to afford food. Desperation began to creep into every corner of Tembe Bay. The villagers whispered about the strange happenings, unsure of what was going wrong. The mayor, overwhelmed by the crisis, pointed his finger at the obvious culprit, climate change. He spoke of rising pollution and warmer waters, blaming these factors for the fish's disappearance and the strange shifts in the ocean's currents. People listened, nodding in agreement, as if the mayor's words were the only explanation that made sense. But not Zamda. She had been taught to understand the ocean in ways the others couldn't. She had grown up under the guidance of her father, Olembe, who had always taught her to trust the ocean's natural rhythms. Where others saw chaos, Zamda saw something deeper, the tides, the winds, the very currents of the sea. They were shifting in ways that didn't fit the patterns of nature. This wasn't just climate change or pollution. Zamda remembered the teachings of her father. He had spoken of the hidden mouth of the sea, a place where the currents would shift and the fish would gather in new, unexplored waters. He had said that the sea was always moving, always changing, but there was a way to read it, to understand when the currents would lead to new fishing ground, to new opportunities. Zamda, with her sharp eye and deep connection to the sea, began to notice the telltale signs that her father had once taught her to look for. The tides weren't just changing, they were moving unnaturally, following a pattern she had never seen before. The currents, which once flowed in predictable ways, were now erratic. Zamda knew that something deeper was happening, something beyond the understanding of the people in her village. She began to track the changes, documenting the shifts in the water, and comparing them to the patterns her father had shown her. As she observed more closely, Zamda realized that the fish hadn't disappeared. They had simply moved to new, deeper waters, beyond the usual fishing route. Her father's teachings flashed in her mind. The sea was vast, and if you understood it well enough, you could follow its movement. The fish were still out there, but they were now hidden from the village's view, in a place only someone with knowledge of the old ways could find. But despite her discovery, the village was sinking further into despair. People were angry and frightened. The mayor continued to blame the environmental changes, offering no real solution. The villagers, struggling with hunger and loss, looked for someone to blame. Yet Zamda kept her discovery to herself, unsure if anyone would believe her. How could she explain to the council that the sea hadn't abandoned them, that it was only a matter of knowing where to look? The village was caught in a cycle of panic. The once vibrant town now seemed like a ghost of its former self. The sea, which had always provided so much, was now a source of fear. Families were starving, and the boats returned with nothing day after day. Desperation filled the air, and yet Zamda held on to the lessons her father had given her, knowing that there was a way to turn things around, but no one was listening. The people of Tembe Bay were too consumed by fear to see that the solution might be closer than they thought. For Zamda, the knowledge of the ocean was her only hope, but it seemed like the whole village had forgotten how to trust it. Despite the gloom, Zamda remained determined. She knew that if she could convince the villagers to listen to her, to trust in the ancient ways that her father had passed down, the fish would return. But first, she would have to prove it. She could feel the ocean calling to her, urging her to find the path her father had once walked, a path that could save the village from starvation and bring the life back to the sea. But she also knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with doubt. The village was losing hope, and Zamda was the only one who could see the way forward. The only question now was whether anyone would believe her before it was too late. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the ocean, Zamda found herself alone in her father's old study. The room was filled with the scent of salt water and worn paper, a place that once felt full of life and warmth. Now, it was a tomb of memories. With her mind swirling with the mysteries of the disappearing fish and the shifting tides, she began to sift through the scattered notes and old maps her father had left behind. As her fingers brushed against the rough edges of a forgotten pouch tucked beneath a loose floorboard, something inside stirred. It was a small, weathered leather bag, one she'd never seen before. Curiosity sparked in her, and she carefully unwrapped the pouch, revealing its content. Inside were a collection of old sketches, cryptic notes, and hand-drawn maps. Zamda's heart raced as she recognized her father's handwriting. He had always spoken in riddles and whispers, passing down ancient knowledge with a quiet sense of urgency. But this was something different, something more important. The sketches detailed currents, wave patterns, and strange hidden places in the ocean. One map stood out, a faded chart of the sea surrounding Tembe Bay, with markings in places no fisherman had ever dared to explore. Zamda's eyes widened as she traced the path on the map. Her father had spoken about a hidden mouth of the sea, a place that shifted with the moon, where the currents changed in ways that no one could predict. He had always told her that the ocean had its secrets, its hidden paths, and only those who truly understood its rhythms could find them. The more she studied the notes, the clearer it became. The fish hadn't disappeared, they had simply moved, following the ocean's natural flow to a deeper coral region, far beyond the traditional fishing route, a place only accessible if you knew how to read the sea's movements and currents. Zamda's pulse quickened. This was it. The solution her father had always hinted at was right in front of her. The fish had migrated to a region that was nearly impossible to reach without the right knowledge. The currents, the tides, they were not random. They followed a pattern, a rhythm, just as her father had taught her. She could feel the pull of the sea calling her, the map and sketches guiding her like a beacon in the dark. The realization hit her with full force. The people of Tembe Bay had been fishing the same waters for generations, unaware that the sea had shifted. No one knew about the deeper coral regions, hidden by unpredictable currents that only someone with her father's wisdom could understand. The fish were still there, but they were beyond reach for anyone who didn't know how to read the ocean's language. Her father had spent his life learning these secrets, and now it was up to Zamda to unlock them. But there was a catch. To follow the path her father had discovered, Zamda would have to navigate treacherous waters, diving deeper into the sea than anyone in the village had dared before. It was a dangerous journey, one that could easily end in disaster if she made even the slightest mistake. But Zamda knew this was her chance to save her village, to bring back the life the sea had once offered. She felt the weight of her father's legacy resting on her shoulders, but she also knew that the secret of the hidden mouth could bring hope to Tembe Bay once again. The ocean had called to her, and now it was up to her to answer. With the map and her father's wisdom, Zamda understood the sea in a way that no one else could. It was time to follow its whispers and chart a new course, a course that would lead her to the fish, to salvation, and perhaps to a new beginning for her village. With her heart pounding but full of hope, Zamda walked into the council hall, holding her father's old map, his notes, and everything she had discovered about the sea's hidden mouth. She had spent weeks studying the tides, watching the moon, and matching the patterns to her father's sketches. She knew, without any doubt, that the fish hadn't vanished forever. They had simply moved. She had seen the signs, felt the ocean speaking in ways most people had forgotten to listen to, and now it was time to tell the council, time to help her village. But as she stepped forward and began to speak, the room didn't go quiet in awe or curiosity. Instead, whispers filled the air, and skeptical eyes stared at her. She spread the old map on the table, tracing the path with her finger, explaining how the currents had changed and where the fish had likely migrated. Her voice was calm but strong, filled with the knowledge passed down from her father. She wasn't guessing, she knew, but the faces watching her weren't listening with open minds. Then Zula, cold and sharp, stood from her seat, her voice cut through the room like a blade. "She's just a cursed girl raised by fish," she sneered, her words dripping with mockery. A few chuckles broke out across the room. The council members exchanged looks, some shaking their heads, others smirking. No one stepped in to stop Zula. No one defended Zamda. The mayor leaned back, arms crossed, a bored look on his face. "Are we really supposed to believe this nonsense?" one of the elders said, laughing openly. Tales of moon maps and talking tides. Zamda's chest tightened, but she didn't step back. She stood tall, repeating her findings, pointing out the logic in the patterns. But her voice, once confident, now had to fight through the noise of laughter and disbelief. Then came the worst moment. As she turned to leave, one of the fishermen, a man her father once taught to dive, stepped forward and spat near her feet. Another did the same. "Stay away from our boats, cursed girl," one muttered. Zamda's eyes burned, but she refused to cry in front of them. She gathered her father's papers, holding them close like a shield. As she walked out of the room, every step felt heavier, but her heart still carried the truth. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds. The wind from the sea felt colder than usual, but even as the village laughed behind her back, Zamda whispered to the ocean in her mind, remembering her father's words. "The sea always listens, even when people don't." She knew they were wrong. She knew she had seen something real, and deep inside, something was building, a quiet fire. They could laugh now, they could spit and mock and ignore. But the ocean didn't lie. One day soon, they would see. One day, they would have no choice but to listen. Just a few days after the council laughed Zamda out of the hall, the sky began to change. It started with strange winds, soft at first, then stronger, sharper, almost angry. The clouds rolled in quickly, dark and heavy, not like normal rain clouds. These were thick, swirling, and restless. The villagers looked up, uneasy. Old fishermen whispered that something was wrong. The sea didn't look right. The air tasted different, like salt and metal. Then, the storm came. It didn't wait for nightfall. By afternoon, the ocean had turned into a monster. Waves rose like mountains, crashing with loud roars that shook the village. The wind howled through the palm trees, tearing roofs and slamming doors. Sand flew through the air like needles, and the sky turned nearly black. Boats rocked violently at the docks, and people screamed as they tried to tie them down. Out at sea, 4 fishing boats had gone out that morning, trying one last time to bring back food. But as the storm hit, their radios went silent. No contact, nothing. The families gathered near the shore, eyes fixed on the wild waters. Mothers clutched their children, faces wet with tears. Wives stood frozen, whispering prayers through trembling lips. Every wave looked like it might throw a boat back, but nothing came. As night fell, the storm only grew worse. Thunder cracked so loud, it sounded like the sky was breaking apart. Lightning lit up the ocean in flashes, revealing the empty, raging sea. Not a single boat returned. No voices on the radio, no sign of life. The panic spread like fire. Children cried, asking where their fathers were. Elderly villagers muttered about curses and angry spirits. Zula, still full of pride, said nothing, but even she looked pale. The The mayor tried to calm the crowd, but his voice was drowned by the storm's fury and the wails of grieving families. People began to lose hope. They feared the worst. They waited for the ocean to throw bodies onto the sand, as it sometimes did when it was cruel. The beach filled with villagers watching, waiting, hoping, but the sea kept its dead, or so they thought. In the middle of it all, Zamda stood silently. She looked at the ocean, not with fear, but with understanding. The storm was terrible, yes, but she had seen signs before. Her father had spoken of these strange storms, unnatural, timed with the shifting tides and deep currents. Something was off, something big. She thought of the path on her father's map. She thought of the missing boats, the hungry family, the council's laughter. Her heart beat hard in her chest. The village needed saving, but no one else could do it. And in that moment, as the storm roared louder and the people cried harder, Zamda knew the ocean was calling her again. The morning after the terrible storm, the village was silent. No boats had returned, no news, only the sound of crashing waves and the cries of families who had spent the night by the shore, waiting. The beach was filled with broken hope. Faces were tired, eyes red. The sea had taken 4 boats, and with them, many of the village's strongest men. No one knew if they were alive or lost forever. Then, in the middle of the crowd, a voice rose, not loud, but clear enough to cut through the grief. It was Zamda. She stepped forward, her hair still damp from the sea mist, her hands clutching the map her father had left behind. Her eyes were strong, calm. She looked not at the ocean, but at the people, and said, "I know how to reach them. My father's path can bring them home." Gasps spread through the crowd. Heads turned. Some backed away in fear or confusion. Others leaned in, listening closely. For a moment, no one spoke. The storm had broken more than just boats. It had cracked the village's spirit. But now, here stood a girl they once mocked, standing tall in front of them all. The mayor stepped forward, unsure. His face showed doubt. His pride held him still. "This is not the time for fairy tale," he said quietly. "These are lives, not story." But Zamda did not flinch. "It's not a story," she said. "My father knew the sea better than anyone. He mapped the secret paths, the moving tides. I studied everything. I can find them." Silence followed her words. Zula, burning with rage and fear, pushed through the crowd. "Are you mad?" she shouted. "You want to trust the village to this cursed child? Her father's dead. She's just a girl who talks to waves." But the people no longer laughed. They remembered the map. They remembered the girl who tried to warn them. Now, with sons and husbands lost to the sea, their hearts were open in a way they hadn't been before. The mayor looked at the dark ocean, then at Zamda. Finally, after a long pause, he gave a small nod. "If there's even a chance, we must take it." Zula's mouth hung open in shock, but no one stood with her now. The village had turned their eyes to Zamda. The girl who listened to the sea had become their only hope. With the whole village watching in silence, Zamda stepped into a small boat, clutching her father's map close to her chest. The sky was still heavy, the waves still restless, but she didn't hesitate. She untied the rope, took one last look at the people on the shore, some fearful, some hopeful, and pushed off into the sea, alone. She followed the path drawn on her father's old map, a path that twisted away from the usual fishing routes. The currents were strange, just like he had written. The waves didn't crash the same way, and the wind spoke in a different rhythm. But she listened closely, just like her father had taught her. Every pull of the oar, every turn of the boat, she trusted the sea and her memory. Hours passed. The village waited, barely breathing. Some stood with hands clutched together, whispering prayers. Others just stared at the horizon, looking for a sign, any sign. Then, just as the sun started to drop toward the water, someone shouted from the beach. A small shape appeared far out on the sea. One boat, then another, and another, 4 in total. Behind them, guiding the way, was Zamda. Cheers broke out before the boats even reached the shore. People ran into the water, calling out names, crying with joy. The missing fishermen were alive, tired, sunburnt, and shaken, but alive, and their boats overflowing with fish, the kind the village hadn't seen in months. Zamda stepped out of her boat last, soaked, her hair stuck to her face, but with eyes full of quiet pride. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. The whole village surrounded her, some dropping to their knees, others holding her hands, thanking her again and again. The mayor raised her arm high and declared that the new fishing route would forever be known as the Daughter's Path. No one called her cursed anymore. In a single day, the girl they once ignored had become the heart of the village. Not just a hero, but a guide, a symbol of hope and proof that sometimes the sea listens best to those who love it most. Word of Zamda's bravery and the return of the fishermen spread like fire beyond Tembe Bay. Whispers of the young girl who followed the sea's secrets reached the ears of powerful people, and soon something unbelievable happened. The queen of the region, Queen Denia herself, announced she would visit the small coastal village in person. It was the first time in many years that royalty had stepped foot in Tembe Bay. The whole village buzzed with excitement and disbelief. When the Queen's golden carriage arrived, people gathered in crowds, lining the streets, trying to catch a glimpse. The moment she stepped out, graceful and proud, she walked directly to Zamda. The village fell silent. No one knew what the Queen would say, but she smiled at the young girl who had once been called cursed and said, "You are the wisdom of the old world in the heart of the new." Her voice was strong, and her words echoed in every heart that once doubted Zamda. Zamda bowed her head, stunned, not sure if she was dreaming, but the Queen wasn't finished. In front of everyone, she announced that Zamda would be appointed as the head of coastal knowledge for the Royal Advisory Circle. It was a role usually held by old men with years of experience, but now it belonged to a girl who once slept in a fish shed. Gasps filled the air, then cheers. Zula stood nearby, her face pale and frozen. For once, she had no words. The woman who had pushed Zamda aside, called her cursed, and made her life bitter, now had to watch her rise higher than anyone in the village. Her silence was louder than any apology. That night, a grand feast was held in the Queen's honor, but it was Zamda who sat beside her, wearing a robe of deep blue, her hands clean, her plate full. Zamda looked like she belonged, not just at the table, but in a future where her voice would guide many. The same girl who was once fed scraps now shared stories with a queen. The sea had taken much from her, but it had also given her back everything, and more.